What if I told you that the Mecca of mountaineering is not Mount Everest? It's not even K2. It's not even in the Himalayas. It's not even on the Asian continent or even in the European Alps or even on that side of the continent. Oh no, the Mecca of mountaineering is actually in Canada. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, Canada's got some pretty impressive mountains as far as climbing is concerned. What about the highest point in British Columbia? Mount Fairweather. Talk about a screwed up name if there ever was one. There's nothing Fairweather about this mountain whatsoever. The northwesternmost corner of British Columbia on the range that faces the Pacific coastline. But that's not it either, as brutal as that of a climb as that is. Highest point in Canada is just up the coast from there, Mount Logan, 20,000+ feet. Not anybody's idea of a picnic stroll. And the weather up there is just as brutal, if not slightly worse than Mount Fairweather. No, the Mecca of mountaineering is actually in the territory of Nunavut, which is the far northeastern territory of Canada. This is the story of Barbeau Peak, sometimes called Mount Barbeau. Barbeau Peak is 8,580 feet above sea level. And you're thinking, how tough can it be? It's less than a third of the elevation of Everest. True. It's not a technically particularly challenging climb, although it has its issues. There are crevices. It's a very rocky peak, definitely for sure. But the problem with this particular mountain, the reason why it's the Everest or the Mecca of mountaineering, is the sheer remoteness of it. Barbeau Peak is north of 81 degrees north latitude and about 74 degrees west latitude. It is the tallest mountain east of the Canadian Rockies, and obviously the tallest mountain on where it is, which is Ellesmere Island, which is a giant Canadian Shield Arctic island, and it's about as far north in Canada as you can get. To give you a clue, the territory of Nunavut is larger than most European countries, has only a population of 34,000. Now, to get a grip on how remote this place is, the closest settlement of any kind is 200 miles east. And Ellesmere Island itself only has an overall population of 153 people, all centered on that one town, which is called Grise Fjord, on the far southern tip of Ellesmere Island. That's where your nearest medical help is going to have to come from. And given the size of the town, it's not going to be top shelf medical help. You fall down one of those crevasses, you're likely not coming back alive. You get in any sort of accident on this mountain, you're likely not coming back alive. It costs more to get to Mount Barbeau than it does to hire Sherpas to help you get up Mount Everest. You know, those Sherpas run you about $20,000 to get the travel itinerary to even get to Barbeau Peak is double that for each individual. And Mount Barbeau has only been climbed by 7 parties in history, and only one of them was solo. Otherwise, those costs have been split between several people. So it's the most expensive mountain in the world to get to. And again, if you get into a medical emergency, anything of the sort, you're probably going to lose your life up there. depending on the severity of the injury. You fall down one of those crevasses, it's pretty much lights out for you. Because that help is 700 miles away, and it's not even going to be world-class help. It would be what amounts to small-town clinic help. So let's imagine you break a leg and the only clinic available to you is a small walk-in urgent care, and yet you've got a broken leg. That's what you got on Barbeau Peak. Barbeau Peak doesn't look all that menacing in pictures. It's what they call a nunatak. Nunataks are mountains because the snowpack is so deep at this latitude that these mountains go high up and the snow practically covers every inch of them, except for a small tip top of the mountain will stick through it, or maybe some of the ledges will stick up through it, barely visible. And so Barbeau Peak is what's called a nunatak. A First Nations term. Of course, the Inuit are the predominant tribe in the Nunavut territory. So they named them Nunataks. The first party to ever scale this peak did so in 1967. They were British, and they came on a Royal Air Force mission. They named the peak after a well-renowned geographer known to have charted the territory, named Marius Barbeau. So they named the peak, and the peak is named after a local regional geographer who has mapped this entire territory. Getting to this place, of course, is very expensive. First thing you gotta do is fly into the Nunavut capital of Iqaluit. On its own, not a cheap trip. Iqaluit is the capital of Nunavut territory. It has a population of about a little under 8,000, but it's their big metropolis. It's Nunavut's version of it's their Mexico City. From there, you're taking another, like a puddle jump. There's Arctic airlines such as Ken Boric Air, for just to name one, Canadian or North being another. They specialize in flights in this part of the world, and they have planes that are acclimated to this particular territory so that the fuel lines don't freeze and so that antifreeze doesn't freeze. You're taking one of their planes from Iqaluit to Grise Fjord, the town I mentioned earlier. Several $1,000s just to get to this point. From Grise Fjord, it's a helicopter ride. You're spending, $20,000+ on a scheduled helicopter ride that may or may not make it back on time. Again, the weather. The weather in Grise Fjord itself can be dicey. Departures can be delayed for several days with zero notice whatsoever. You're taking a helicopter with maybe 5 or 6 people tops, 200+ miles inland into Ellesmere Island to reach a small lake. From the small lake, you're hiking about 10 kilometers to Barbeau Peak. And you thought your travel difficulties were severe. Imagine being one of these people who has flown every type of plane imaginable only to get to a remote nunatak in the middle of literally nowhere, for lack of a better term, to do a basic hike with several dangers to 8,500 feet above sea level. You're probably not going to be written about in your local newspaper for making this trip. The place is so remote that, finding a journalist who even knows where the heck it is a challenge. So this is not your meal ticket to fame and fortune. In fact, it could leave you broke and penniless. So the only people who have ever really tried it are people who've had the resources to afford a $40,000 to $50,000 mountaineering trip. And again, not a key to fame and fortune, but it is an interesting, people who do this do get an interesting piece of history because they have climbed the most remote mountain in the world. That is why Barbeau is the Mecca of mountaineering. The altitude is not high. The latitude is 81.5 degrees north. Only a few hundred miles south of the North Pole. Temperatures on this mountain, if there was even a weather station up there, but there's not, would likely indicate a place that has never reached above freezing. And spends much of its winter well below zero. The large majority, if not all, of the successful summits of Barbeau have been done in anywhere between April and July. That is basically really the only real window, weather-wise, for a successful summit. If you're lucky enough, you get a windless day, and then the climb itself is technically not super challenging, and you kind of basically would quote-unquote sprint up the mountain and also be able to make it down nearly as fast. Forget skiing on this mountain because of its rocky outcrops and the fact that the sides stick out of the deep snowpack with sharp, jagged edges that look absolutely unreal in pictures. In a future version of this, I'd like to have a picture of this peak. It doesn't look very menacing, but it is. And its sheer remoteness indeed makes it the Everest of mountaineering. There's no place that's more expensive and more difficult to get to. Even Everest is cheap by comparison. Oh, and by the way, in addition to the $40,000 to $50,000 to get there, that doesn't even include for the equipment that you're going to spend. And hiring Sherpas to get you up this mountain is not an option. The closest people, as far as even living within range of this mountain, as I mentioned before, are down in Grise Fjord, 700 miles south of Barbeau Peak. So there's nobody to hire to carry your gear. You're doing it, this is a do-it-yourself job. This is a tougher do-it-yourself job than you're going to pick up at Home Depot. So you're spending several $1,000s on that. Parkas, crampons, pickaxes, things that are going to professionally help you on a technical level to get up over those crevasses and up those cliffs. Equipment that's more typical of Everest is not nearly as used here, but it can come in handy, and I would, it's highly suggest that you carry it. So that is the story of the Mecca of mountaineering. Not Everest, not K2, not any Himalayan peak. It is Barbeau Peak. $8,500 feet of polar torture and a remoteness that makes help virtually impossible to get should something happen. So that's it for tonight. You guys enjoy your day. I'll do relatively well here, and I will see you on the next go. Peace out, homies.